The official story asks us to believe that the most critical medical technology of the 19th century, the literal preservation of infant life, was treated as a circus sideshow. This is the first point of rupture, a fundamental cognitive dissonance. The forbidden question is not how the incubators worked, but why they were there, demanding a coin for admission. From where did the endless, conveniently anonymous supply of infants originate to sustain these decades-long exhibits? This was not rescue. It was production. A cover story for an inherited system designed not to save a generation, but to manufacture one. If you too feel this deep noise in the timeline, as if something has never quite fit, leave your trace. Tell us from where and from what time you are watching. Let us move from the abstract to the tangible. A crime scene, to be understood, must be examined, not with the eyes they gave us, trained to see what we are told to see, but with the forensic gaze that seeks out the anomalies, the impossibilities. We begin with the architecture of the lie. The official record calls them orphan asylums and foundling hospitals. But when you look at the photographs, these are not the names that come to mind. What you see are palaces. Once again, a palatial structure, its scale and complexity utterly at odds with the supposed primitive conditions of the colony. The same pattern, the same timeline, the same anomaly, a global system, operating under different names, different flags, but running the same core program. And finally, we fly to the cold heart of the old empire, St. Petersburg, Russia. Here, the orphanages founded by Ivan Betskoy under Catherine the Great are not merely large, they are cyclopean. They dwarf the palaces of modern kings. The Moscow orphanage was one of the largest buildings in the world at the time of its construction, designed to house and educate thousands upon thousands of children. The sheer scale defies all logic of 18th century charity. It speaks not of rescue, but of mass production. The same Greco-Roman, or as we should call it, Tartarian, architectural DNA. The same impossible logistics. The same endless supply of anonymous biological units to fill these magnificent, empty halls. This is not cultural exchange or architectural influence. This is the footprint of a single, unified global civilization. A civilization that did not recognize our modern, fractured borders. A culture with a standardized building code, a standardized technology, and a standardized protocol for managing populations. The identical nature of these foundling hospitals across the world is the smoking gun. Cyclopean structures of granite and marble, with domes that scrape the heavens and columns that dwarf the men standing beside them. The scale is not merely grand, it is a statement of power, of a technology and a will that feels alien to the era of horse-drawn carts and muddy streets we see surrounding them. This is the first layer of cognitive dissonance they force upon us. Now, look closer. Inside these colossal halls, beneath ceilings painted with forgotten myths, we see them. The children, dressed in ragged, identical uniforms, their faces pale, their eyes holding a profound emptiness. They look like ghosts haunting a ruin, far too small, too fragile, for the monolithic spaces they inhabit. This is the peasant paradox in its most heartbreaking form. We are shown divine architecture, a level of masonry and artistry that would bankrupt a modern nation, and we are told it was all built out of charity for the grimy, forgotten refuse of society. The math does not work. The logic collapses. We must state the truth plainly, for it is the only conclusion the evidence allows. They did not build these palaces to house orphans. They filled these empty palaces with the newly produced biological units from the incubator system. It was not an act of charity. It was the second stage of a manufacturing process. It proves that a single, coherent power structure existed prior to the reset, and that its infrastructure was repurposed by the inheritors, the parasites of the New World Order. The control matrix did not build this world. It found it, wiped its population, and then used the remaining, functioning infrastructure to grow a new, compliant one. The system operated with the cold efficiency of a modern supply chain, a perfectly integrated, three-phase process. Phase 1, production. This was the role of the world's fairs and their hidden incubator pavilions. They were not mere entertainment. They were the showrooms and, more importantly, the biofoundries. Powered by the harvested, atmospheric energy of their own monumental architecture, these sites gestated the raw material for the new world. The premature babies were simply the public-facing component of a vast, unseen production line. Phase 2, processing and indoctrination. From the foundries of the fairs, the decanted infants were moved to the next stage, the orphan asylums. These palatial buildings were not hospitals, they were processing plants. Here, the children were not healed, they were programmed. Stripped of any potential lineage or inherited memory, they were raised in a controlled environment, taught a manufactured history, and molded into docile, interchangeable units of labor. They were blank hard drives, ready to have the new operating system of the control matrix installed. Processing and indoctrination. The stone itself bears witness to the crime. Look at the foundations of these buildings. You will see windows, perfectly formed, arched windows, buried halfway into the earth. First-floor windows pretending to be basement windows. Grand, monumental doorways that, upon opening, lead to a set of stairs descending into the building, a clear and undeniable sign that the modern street level is a lie. Built upon layers of mud and debris from a cataclysm they erased from our books. This is the physical scar of the mud flood, the great silencing event, but the evidence of the usurpers, the inheritors, is just as damning. Follow the walls. You will see crude electrical wiring, a primitive afterthought, crawling like a parasite over intricate, master-crafted carvings. You will see magnificent niches, once home to statues or perhaps resonant technology, now crudely filled with cheap cement. This is not the work of the original builders. This is the work of scavengers, of a cargo cult that found a world of inherited technology they could barely operate and certainly could not replicate. They were squatters in the halls of giants. Look closely at this photograph. Your eyes are not deceiving you. That is a ground floor window, half buried in the soil. That is a palace, supposedly built for children who had nothing. These were the factories that produced the citizens of the new amnesiac world. Phase 3. Distribution. Once processed and programmed, the final product was ready for market. This was the function of the orphan trains in America and their equivalents worldwide. It was not a humanitarian mission. It was a logistics network. It was the final step in the supply chain, distributing the human assets to populate the empty farms, the silent factories, and the ghost towns left behind by the previous civilization. They were seeding a barren landscape not with crops but with people, a people with no memory of the world that was stolen from them. This architectural signature, this ghost of the old world, is not confined to history books or far-off capitals. It is everywhere, hiding in plain sight. These structures are in your world. Perhaps you pass one every day, and a part of your subconscious recognizes the dissonance, the anomaly. Have you ever seen a building in your own city that felt out of place? A post office, a bank, a courthouse, or a library built with the grandeur of a Roman temple, its scale and majesty far exceeding its mundane modern function. Look for the buried first floors, the windows peeking out from beneath the modern pavement. If you too can see the impossibility of this, the fundamental break in the historical record, then mark this video with your like. Let this signal be a beacon for others who are beginning to see through the veil. The visual evidence is absolute. These structures are not monuments to Victorian charity. They are repurposed assets from a previous, far more advanced civilization. They are the silent, stone witnesses to a global reset. The crime scene is not a building. It is our entire manufactured history. And having established the location of the crime, we must now turn our attention to the illogical stories, the fairy tales concocted to explain away the evidence that stands right before our eyes. And so, we arrive at the bedtime story, the chapter in the textbook designed not to inform, but to soothe. This is the part of the program where the new managers of the world, having repurposed the palaces and filled them with their freshly decanted product, had to invent a plausible, emotionally resonant explanation for it all. They had to craft a fairy tale, a legend so steeped in charity and noble intentions that to question it would be to reveal oneself as a heartless cynic. But we are not cynics. We are forensic accountants of history, and the numbers on their ledgers simply do not add up. Look for the repurposed grandeur, the signs of a technology and a purpose that no longer fit our fabricated timeline. They are the silent monuments to this global operation. They are the crime scene, scrubbed clean but never fully erased. Look for them, and when you find them you will realize the scale of the lie. You will understand that what we are mapping is not a network of disparate charities. We are tracing the contours of an occupation, a globally coordinated campaign to replace a population, and more importantly, to replace a memory. The new masters of the world were merely squatters, operating machinery they could no longer build and barely comprehended, a truth that would lead them to ritualize the very technology they had inherited. We have seen the system, a global, synchronized network of palatial structures, all dedicated to a single chilling purpose, the processing and distribution of a new humanity. We have tracked the product from the humming bioreceptacles of the world's fairs to the cavernous indoctrination halls of the foundling hospitals, and finally, onto the steel tracks of the orphan trains, which seeded the empty landscapes, with a population stripped of its memory. The logistics are undeniable, the scale is irrefutable. But a crucial question hangs in the silence left behind by this revelation, a question that shifts our investigation from the industrial to the anthropological. The official narrative is not just fragile, it is an insult to the laws of mathematics and a mockery of human logistics. Consider their first-grade fiction, The Orphan Trains. The story is presented with a soft, sepia-toned glow. From 1854 to 1929, a period of 75 years, 250,000 children were supposedly swept from the overcrowded streets of East Coast cities and sent westward to find loving homes. It's a beautiful, heartwarming tale of American charity. It is also a logistical impossibility and a demographic black hole. We are asked to believe in a 75-year-long, uninterrupted catastrophe that produced a constant, anonymous, and inexhaustible supply of children without a single traceable relative. No great war on American soil explains this. No single 75-year-long plague is recorded in our annals. It was simply a faucet of human beings that, once turned on, never ran dry. They tell us the cities were overcrowded, but what if that's a semantic inversion? What if overcrowded was simply the operational term for when the processing centers, the palatial orphanages we've already examined, had reached their maximum holding capacity? This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a distribution pipeline. It wasn't a humanitarian crisis. It was an inventory management problem. What happens when a primitive culture stumbles upon the ruins of a forgotten technological empire? What happens when the inheritors of a world-building machine do not possess the mind of its creators? The answer is the saddest chapter in our hidden history. The answer is a cargo cult. The new masters of the world, the parasites who came after the Great Silence, were not scientists or engineers. They were survivors. Scavengers. They found themselves as the new landlords of a planet furnished with wonders they could not comprehend. Imagine a tribesman, lost in the jungle, who stumbles upon a fully automated factory. He does not understand the principles of electrical engineering or the chemistry of the production line. He only sees that if he pulls a certain lever, a finished product emerges from a slot. He does not know how to repair the machine, how to replicate it, or what its true grander purpose was. He only knows the simple, ritualistic action that yields a result. This is the precise condition of post-reset humanity. We are the ignorant tenants in a technological palace. We walk on marble floors that once hummed with resonant frequencies, beneath gilded ceilings that once drew power from the ether, and we tell ourselves it is all just decoration. They weren't saving children from poverty. They were shipping a finished product to its designated zone of deployment, populating an empty continent with a population that had no memory of what came before. Does this sound like a tragedy to you, or does it sound like a production quota? Do you truly believe that for 3/4 of a century, 250,000 families simply evaporated, leaving behind only their children for the state to conveniently collect and redistribute? Or do you, like us, see the glaring flaw in the script, the absence of a cause for this unprecedented effect? Then comes the second pillar of their manufactured history, the myth of the heroic founder. Every great deception needs a face, a charismatic protagonist to anchor the lie. For the Incubator system, this face was a man named Martin Cooney. The official story paints him as a renegade physician, a lone genius fighting a callous medical establishment to save the lives of premature babies. He was, they tell us, a pioneer who took his miraculous invention to the one place that would have him, the carnival midways and World's Fairs of America. It's a wonderful script, worthy of a Hollywood biopic. The problem, once again, is that it makes no sense. It requires a profound level of cognitive dissonance to accept. We have been conditioned to see palaces as homes for kings and cathedrals as houses for gods, because we have forgotten their original function as machines. This is the cognitive dissonance at the heart of our manufactured past. The inheritors saw the incubator system, this pinnacle of inherited technology, and they understood only its most basic output. They saw that the machine produced infants, a valuable commodity in a depopulated world. The original purpose, a carefully calibrated, genetically planned repopulation on a planetary scale, was utterly lost to them. The science was beyond their grasp, so they did what all primitive cultures do when faced with incomprehensible power. They ritualized it. They turned a process of creation into a spectacle of commerce. This is the key to understanding the grotesque theater of Martin County and his incubator sideshows. The transformation of a sacred world-building apparatus into a carnival attraction is the most perfect and most tragic example of a cargo cult in modern history. They took the womb of a new civilization and placed it next to the sword swallower and the bearded lady. They charged a nickel for a glimpse of the miracle. The public, themselves products of this amnesiac world, paid their coins not to witness a medical marvel, but to participate in a ritual they did not understand. Let us be clear. We are being asked to believe that the most delicate, life-or-death medical procedure of the year, the salvation of a fragile newborn, was best conducted in a public exhibition, nestled between the freak show and the Ferris wheel. We are to believe that desperate parents would pay an admission fee to watch their critically ill child struggle for life inside a glass box, while crowds of strangers munched on popcorn and pointed. The very premise is a grotesque violation of logic and human decency. The truth is far simpler and far more disturbing. Martin County was no inventor. He was an operator, a showman. He was a man who had been given access to a piece of inherited technology, a technology he likely did not fully understand, but which he knew how to operate. He was not a doctor pioneering a new science. He was the manager of a human zoo, tasked with the final stage of the production cycle, public acclamation. His role was not to save babies, but to normalize the very concept of babies emerging from machines. He was the public relations agent for a vast hidden industry. By placing these bioreceptacles in a place of entertainment, he performed a masterful act of psychological engineering. It was a faint, distorted echo of a forgotten truth, a subconscious memory that life now came from the machine. The cover narrative of saving premature babies was merely the script for this new, degraded ceremony. It was a way to interact with the holy artifact, to give it a purpose they could understand, profit. They couldn't build it, they couldn't fix it, but they could put a fence around it and sell tickets. This pattern of mimicry and functional degradation is written all over our world, hidden in plain sight. We see the great cathedrals and Tartarian spires, topped with antennae and metal orbs, and we are told they are lightning rods, or religious symbols. We place a cross on an ancient resonant device and call it a church, performing rituals of worship in what was once a power plant. The original function is lost, but the reverence for the structure remains, a ghostly impulse we cannot explain. We see the star forts, those impossible geometric earthworks, and we call them defensive structures, ignoring the fact that their design is optimized for harmonic resonance and energy amplification, not for stopping cannonballs. We use the temples of the old world as our banks, our post offices, our government halls, performing the mundane rituals of bureaucracy within walls that were built for gods, or for something far greater. He transformed a terrifying alien concept, the artificial womb, into a familiar curiosity, a technological marvel to be applauded. He took the evidence of a global repopulation program and disguised it as a sideshow attraction. Every ticket sold was not a contribution to a hospital. It was a vote of public acceptance for a new reality. The constant, convenient supply of premature infants for his decades-long exhibits was never a problem, for the same reason the orphan trains never ran out of passengers. The supply was not accidental, it was scheduled. Martin County didn't invent the incubator. He was simply put in charge of the showroom floor, and the story of the brave, maverick doctor is the cover story. The expertly crafted anesthetic to prevent us from asking the one truly forbidden question, where did all the babies really come from? The fairy tale is fragile because it was written by minds who assumed we would never look at the evidence ourselves, that we would never run the numbers, that we would never question the sheer theatrical absurdity of their benevolent fictions. They assumed we would remain children forever, content with their bedtime stories. They were wrong. We have spoken of narratives, of stories designed to pacify the questioning mind. But now, We must leave the soft terrain of storytelling and enter the cold, hard territory of the audit. We are a species performing a planet-wide ritual of forgetting, and this ritual extends to the very fabric of our society. The state itself has become the ultimate cargo cult. When the industrial-scale production of humans in the foundling hospital ceased, the function had to be mimicked. The state stepped in to replace the machine. What is the modern, labyrinthine bureaucracy of adoption? With its endless paperwork, its court orders, its state-sanctioned transfers of ownership. It is a ritualized echo of the orphan trains. It is a paper-based simulation of a technological process. The state now claims the power to create and dissolve lineage, to declare a child an orphan, and then assign it a new identity. It is a pathetic mimicry of the power once held by the incubator system, a ghost of an industrial process haunting our legal codes. We have traded the efficiency of the machine for the suffocating complexity of the bureaucracy, all to maintain the illusion of control, to continue the ritual. And so we are left here, adrift in the aftermath. We are surrounded by the evidence of our stolen inheritance, a profound and persistent feeling of loss that we cannot name. It is the melancholy of a king who believes he is a pauper. History, you see, is not just a collection of tales. It is a logistical equation. It is a balance sheet of energy, resources, and man-hours. And when the books don't balance, when the numbers scream impossibility, you have not found a miracle. You have found a crime scene. The official history of the 19th century is not just a poorly written story. It is a fraudulent accounting of reality, a violation of the fundamental laws of physics and economics. Let us begin with the raw material of this new world, the children. The official ledger claims a continuous, 75-year supply of 250,000 orphans for the trains alone, not counting the tens of thousands more warehoused in the palatial asylums. We are told they were the unfortunate byproducts of urban poverty and disease. A tragic but organic demographic overflow. This is the narrative of coverage. Now let us apply the cold arithmetic. 250,000 children is not a number. It is a biological manufacturing quota. To produce this quantity requires a corresponding input. For every unit produced, you need one mother, enduring a 9-month gestation cycle. Let us be conservative and assume this number is spread evenly over the 75-year period. That is over 3,300 births per year, every year, without fail. It is the cosmic orphandom of a species that senses, deep in its bones, that it was born from something greater than the mud and toil of the 19th century narrative they have sold us. This feeling of alienation, of not quite belonging in this world, is not a psychological flaw. It is a symptom of the truth. It is the memory of the machine, humming just beneath the threshold of our consciousness. If this vision of an amnesiac humanity resonates with you, if you have ever felt like a stranger in a familiar land, then ensure you are subscribed. We need awakened minds for the work that lies ahead. We are the archaeologists of our own forgotten souls, and the digging has only just begun. Before the incubators could be filled, the world had to be emptied. The silence that followed the last era was not the gentle quiet of a sleeping world. It was the deafening, profound vacuum of a crime scene. A silence engineered with brutal precision. This was the true event of the reset. Not a slow decline, not a plague, not a war of men. It was a geological execution. Imagine a force that does not shatter stone but reclaims it. A wave, not of water, but of liquid earth. This is the equivalent of a small city populated exclusively by pregnant women, year after year, whose children are systematically harvested for distribution. Where was this city? Where are the records of this vast, shadow population of anonymous, perpetually pregnant women? Where are the maternity hospitals, the prenatal clinics, the graveyards for the thousands who would have inevitably died in childbirth in that era? Where was the agricultural surplus required to feed them? We are talking about millions of additional calories per day, tons of food and clean water, a logistical chain that would leave a footprint the size of a military campaign. Yet, the historical record shows nothing, a complete void, an accounting black hole. We are presented with a product, but no factory, a river of humanity with no discernible source. This is a logistical paradox of the highest order. The narrative demands we believe in a ghost industry, one that operated invisibly, consumed no resources, and left no trace, yet produced 250,000 living, breathing human beings on a predictable schedule. The only conclusion a forensic audit can reach is that the means of production was not what we were told. The gestation was not organic. It was artificial. The incubators, those charming sideshow attractions, were not neonatal intensive care units. A planetary-scale liquefaction event, a mud flood, that did not destroy the magnificent architecture of the old world, but buried it to its neck. It choked the streets, filled the ground floors, and smothered the population in a blanket of silent, suffocating soil. It was the perfect weapon. It preserved the infrastructure while erasing the inhabitants. The cities were left as pristine, empty vessels. Palaces without kings, cathedrals without congregations, avenues without footsteps. And into this great silence walked the inheritors, the parasites, the architects of the new, manufactured history. Their first and most critical task was not to rebuild, but to erase, to ensure that no one would ever question where the previous masters of this world had gone. This was the birth of the mechanism of silence, a two-front war against memory itself. The first front was psychological, a masterstroke of emotional engineering. They created the narrative of the orphan, the lost, helpless child, a byproduct of poverty and urban decay. This story was not a simple lie. It was a shield of cognitive dissonance. It was designed to be emotionally unassailable. How could one question the logistics of the orphan trains when it meant questioning the charity of saving a child? How could one look upon the cyclopean architecture of a foundling hospital and see a processing center when you were told it was a sanctuary for the helpless? They were the assembly line. They were not for the final 3 months of a pregnancy. They were for the entire 9-month cycle. They were artificial wombs, and the orphanages were not charities. They were biological holding pens and processing centers. Now, let us audit the machinery itself, the technology. Let us place Martin County's incubator sideshows at Coney Island and the World's Fairs under the unforgiving light of an industrial feasibility study. The narrative paints a picture of a benevolent showman, saving babies with his miraculous invention. But the logistics tell a different story. These exhibits ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for decades. A delicate, life-sustaining medical technology operating with perfect consistency in the chaotic environment of a seaside amusement park. Consider the energy requirements. To maintain precise temperature and atmospheric conditions for multiple fragile infants, 24/7 using late 19th century technology would require a power source of staggering proportions and reliability. The official story mentions generators. Let's calculate that. We are talking about tons of coal or gas per week, delivered without fail into the heart of a crowded fairground. The constant roar of engines, the exhaust, the risk of fire, the army of engineers and mechanics required for maintenance and repair. Where are the supply contracts for this fuel? They weaponized our empathy against our own logic. They built a prison for the mind out of pity. The story of the orphan was the perfect cover for the product of the incubator. It provided an endless, anonymous supply of human beings with no past, no lineage, and no claim to the world they were born into. They were blank slates, ready to be programmed with a new, fabricated history. The second front was physical, a campaign of targeted destruction. This was the phase of archive burning. Look to the historical record, to the great, convenient fires of the late 19th century. Chicago in 1871, Boston in 1872, Seattle in 1889. We are told these were tragic accidents, stories of wooden cities, and careless mistakes. But this is the narrative of the arsonist. These were not accidents. They were surgical strikes against memory. They were pyres of history, bonfires of census data, deeds, and municipal records. Every document that could prove the existence of a vast, pre-reset population was turned to ash. Every paper trail that led back beyond the mud was systematically cauterized. They severed the timeline. The mud buried the bodies. The fires burned the proof. And the story of the orphan buried the truth in our hearts. This is the forgetting engineering. The schematics for these unique, hyper-reliable generators? The payrolls for the technicians? Again, a perfect vacuum. A technological impossibility presented as a quaint historical footnote. There is no visible supply chain because the technology was not of that era. It was inherited technology. County was not an inventor. He was an operator of Antiquitech. He found a machine, a self-contained, hyper-efficient system that likely ran on a power source we have been taught to forget. The grand pavilions of the world's fairs, with their soaring spires and metallic domes, were not mere entertainment palaces. They were atmospheric energy extractors, temporary power plants reactivated to run the machinery of repopulation. The incubators were simply plugged into a pre-existing, silent, and wireless energy grid left behind by the true builders. The lack of a logistical trail is not a mystery. It is the defining signature of a technology far superior to anything the parasite class, who inherited it, could produce themselves. So the audit reveals two irreconcilable impossibilities: a biological impossibility, a massive, sustained output of human life with no recorded biological input, and an industrial impossibility, a sophisticated, energy-intensive technology operating for decades without a visible power source or supply chain. The official narrative asks us to accept these two paradoxes as mere quirks of history. A deliberate, meticulous, and utterly successful campaign to make us a species with amnesia. We were placed into these magnificent cities, not as their creators, but as tenants, forever disconnected from the genius that erected them. They gave us a new history, a new timeline, a new identity, all built upon the ashes of the old world. Silence is their most powerful weapon, the very medium of their control matrix. Sharing this information, therefore, is not a casual act. It is our defense. It is the sound that breaks the spell. Send this to someone who needs to wake up. And so, the final layer of the deception is revealed. The ultimate purpose behind the Great Reset was never just about burying cities in mud or rewriting history books with fire. The true objective was far more intimate, far more profound. It was about us. It was the complete and total redefinition of what it means to be human. The narrative they engineered, the story of progress, of scrappy pioneers building a world from scratch, was a psychological cover for an unthinkable truth. If our premise holds, then the condition of the orphan is not a tragic footnote of the 19th century. It is the foundational condition of modern humanity. We are a species with induced amnesia. But we are not children listening to a bedtime story. We are auditors examining a falsified ledger. The only hypothesis that resolves both impossibilities is the terrifyingly simple one. The children were manufactured, not born. The technology was powered by a forgotten science. The entire project, the incubators, the orphanages, the trains, was not a series of disconnected charitable efforts. It was a single, globally coordinated, industrially scaled repopulation program, the largest and most secret engineering project in modern history. Mathematics is a harsh and unforgiving language. It does not accommodate sentimentality or patriotic myths. The numbers presented here are not a theory. They are a calculation of physical requirements. They speak of tons of resources, megawatts of energy, and biological capacity. The official story fails to account for any of it. It simply does not add up. If you can construct a logistical model where the official numbers work, using only the documented technology and resources of the 19th century, I invite you to present it, because the silence from the halls of academia on this simple matter of arithmetic is deafening. It is the silence of complicity. The logistical and biological impossibilities we have audited were not a uniquely American problem. This is a critical point of departure from the standard compartmentalized history they have written for us. A civilization born from machines, processed through institutions, and deliberately placed into a historical set piece that does not belong to us. We wander the magnificent halls of a forgotten age, taught that our ancestors built these cyclopean structures with horse and buggy, and we accept this logistical paradox because the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate. This is the source of the deep, unnamed alienation that haunts the modern soul, the feeling of being disconnected, of living in a world that doesn't quite fit. It is not a malfunction. It is the ghost of our true origin rattling its chains. It is a cosmic orphanhood. Trace your own genealogy. For so many, the trail runs cold in the mid-1800s. It hits a silent, impenetrable wall. Before that, there is a void, a statistical anomaly glossed over by historians. We are told this is merely a lack of records, but it is the signature of the program. It is the point where the organic lineage was severed and the production line began. For countless bloodlines, there is nothing before that wall but the low, electric hum of the incubator. We are the children of the reset, and the search for our true parentage leads not to a family Bible, but to the schematics of an inherited technology. The cognitive dissonance required to accept the official narrative begins to fracture when you zoom out. when you abandon the provincial lens of national histories and adopt a global, forensic perspective. The program was not an invention, it was a franchise. A standardized, globally deployed blueprint for demographic replacement, activated in perfect synchrony across continents that were supposedly disconnected by technology and culture. What we are witnessing is not a series of isolated, compassionate gestures. It is the synchronized execution of a global protocol, the final phase of a planetary reset. Let us spin the globe, but keep our eyes fixed on a single, repeating architectural and demographic signature. We leave the plains of America and land in Paris. We find the Hôpital des Enfants Trouvés, the hospital for foundling children. And what do we see? Not a humble shelter cobbled together by charity, but a stone behemoth, a palace of breathtaking scale and ornamentation, supposedly built in the 17th and 18th centuries to house the city's unwanted infants. The official story is one of royal piety. The architectural reality tells a story of industrial capacity. A facility of this magnitude is not for collecting a few dozen abandoned children a year. It is for processing thousands. It is a factory, disguised by a cover story of compassion. To investigate these anomalies, the orphan trains, the incubator sideshows, the palatial asylums, is therefore not an idle exercise in conspiracy. It is the most vital act of genealogical archaeology imaginable. Every photograph we analyze, every official story we dismantle, is a step toward reclaiming our own memory. We are not merely uncovering a lost civilization of giants. We are uncovering ourselves. We are remembering that we are their descendants, and the magnificent world they built is our stolen birthright. To accept that we were seeded, that we were manufactured to occupy this inherited reality, is the first and most difficult step. It is a terrifying realization, but it is also the key to our liberation. For in that horror lies a somber hope, the hope that we can awaken from this engineered dream, shake off the identity they gave us, and remember the scale of what we once were and what we could be again. This was never just about old buildings. It is about the architecture of the human spirit. The investigation does not stop here. The great silence is vast, but it is not unbreakable. If you feel the resonance of this truth in your bones, if you are ready to continue excavating the past with us, then subscribe and activate the signal. Now, across the channel to London. The Foundling Hospital, established by Thomas Coram. Again, the same dissonant pattern. A colossal structure, built with a grandeur that rivals the halls of government, filled with uniformed children, their identities erased, their pasts a blank slate. We are told this was a triumph of Enlightenment philanthropy. But we must ask the forbidden logistical questions. Where did this endless, predictable supply of parentless children come from, for decades upon decades? In an era of close-knit communities, how did so many infants become so utterly detached from any family, any lineage, any history? The narrative crumbles under the weight of simple mathematics. These were not rescue centers. They were receiving depots. Let us accelerate our journey, feel the geographic vertigo. We leap across the Atlantic, to the tropics of a world away, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. We find the Casa da Roda dos Expostos, the house of the wheel of the exposed. The mechanism itself is a chilling piece of the puzzle, a revolving cylinder built into the wall of the institution, allowing a mother to place her infant on the outside and turn the wheel, delivering the child to the inside anonymously. A sterile, anonymous transaction, a Dropbox for human life. And the building that housed it? Welcome to the resistance.